My name is Camille. I was 37 years old when I stood in my fiancé's kitchen, heels on, food plated, champagne already chilled, and heard him tell his best friend exactly what he thought of me. He called me convenient. He said I was past my prime and I knew it. He said I was easy because I had nowhere better to go. And then he laughed. And his friend laughed with him. And I stood there with a serving spoon in my hand and made a decision. What Derek didn't know was that I hadn't been just loving him for 4 years. I'd been watching him. And the woman he described to that friend, desperate, finished, easy, she was about to show him exactly how wrong he was. Let me tell you how I got here. Before we dive in, comment where you're watching from today. And if stories like this speak to you, hit subscribe because tomorrow's story is even more intense. Let me tell you something about the dress. I'd bought it 6 months before that night. Put it on layaway, actually, because it was more than I'd normally spend on myself. Navy blue, cut just right. Derek had seen me in it once and said it made me look almost model thin, and I'd filed that away the way you file away a compliment when you're grateful for it instead of bothered by it. I should have been bothered by it, but that night, standing in his kitchen with the oven still warm and champagne already in the fridge, I put that dress on like it was armor. That's who I was back then, a woman who turned compliments into reasons. My name is Camille Davenport. I was 37 years old and I ran the administrative operations for a mid-sized hospital system with 460 employees under my umbrella. I managed multi-million-dollar budgets. I caught errors that would have cost people their jobs and fixed them quietly before anyone knew to panic. I was good at what I did, and more than that, I was thorough. Organized in the way that looks calm from the outside, but is actually running calculations every second. I brought all of that home with me. Every bit of it. I'd been with Derek Okafor, my fiancé, financial planner, the man I'd built 4 years around. Long enough to know his coffee order, his mother's birthday, the exact way his jaw tightened when he felt professionally threatened. I knew which friends brought out his generosity and which ones made him perform. I knew his fears before he named them. That's what 4 years looks like when a woman is paying attention. He knew I took my coffee with oat milk. On a good day. You know what the worst part was? I told myself that was enough. The house smelled like garlic and rosemary and the good wine I'd picked for the sauce. I'd gotten home 2 hours early, left a quarterly review meeting on my lunch break to start prep, changed into the dress in the bathroom upstairs, touched up my makeup without being asked. 3 of Derek's closest friends were supposed to come that night. A small celebration dinner. Informal, I'd said, but I'd set the table properly and folded the napkins and chilled 2 bottles because I wanted it to feel like something worth celebrating. We were engaged. 3 months in. Wedding 8 months out. The joint account I'd been filling steadily, every paycheck consistent as rent, sat at just over $14,000. I believed in us. That's the part that still costs me something to say out loud. I genuinely, fully believed. I'd turned down a promotion in Atlanta the same week Derek proposed. Director of Operations for a regional health system, the kind of role that comes around once, maybe twice in a career like mine. I turned it down, and I told myself it was love. Looking back, I think it was also fear. Fear of what 40 looks like when you're doing it alone. When you're the woman who chose the career and lost the man and has to explain that at every family dinner until somebody changes the subject. My mother used to say, "Camille, you give too much too fast. Make them work for it." I can still hear it in her voice. Sunday mornings, the smell of eggs and hair grease and gospel bleeding through the walls of her small kitchen. Her standing at the stove, not even looking at me, just talking like she knew something I didn't. I thought she was old-fashioned. I thought love was supposed to be generous. I'm not sure what I think anymore. Derek came home early. He was loose in the way that meant he'd already had a drink somewhere, laughing at something on his phone before he even cleared the doorway. He kissed me on the cheek, said the food smelled good, walked to the living room. He didn't ask about my day. I noticed. I always noticed. I just kept plating. His best friend Troy arrived 20 minutes later. Big laugh, louder than necessary, the kind of man who fills a room without adding anything to it. One of the other guests canceled, so it was the three of us, and I was in the kitchen, finishing the last of it while they settled in with their drinks, and the wall between the kitchen and the sitting room was thin. That was a design quirk I had always loved. You could hear the whole house from that kitchen. I used to think it made the place feel alive. Derek's laugh drifted through first, then Troy's voice, lower. "You sure about all this? You seem like you've got 1 foot out, man." A pause. Then Derek said her name wasn't Camille. He called me convenient. He said I was past my prime and I knew it. That's why I was easy. He made a joke about the dress, about what was underneath it, about the difference between how I looked at dinner and how I looked in the morning. Troy laughed, not nervously, fully. My jaw locked. I set the serving spoon down on the counter. I straightened my dress. I picked up the platter. I walked out there with a smile on my face, and I set the food on that table. And when Derek raised his glass and said, "To us, to our future," I raised mine too, and I smiled at him like I didn't know a single thing. Troy left around 10. Big goodbye, too much laughing, a hand clap on Derek's shoulder at the door. I stood behind Derek and smiled and said it was good to see him. Troy looked at me once, just once, and something moved across his face that I couldn't name then. I can name it now. It was guilt. The cheap kind. The kind that shows up too late to be useful. Derek rinsed his glass, set it in the sink, and stretched his arms over his head like a man with nothing on his conscience. "I'm beat," he said. "You coming up soon?" "In a bit. Let me get the kitchen." He kissed my temple and disappeared down the hall. I stood at the sink and turned on the water. I washed every dish, wiped every counter, put the leftover food away in containers, and stacked them in the fridge in the way Derek liked, labeled, organized, neat. I did all of it with my hands, and none of it with my mind, because my mind was somewhere else entirely, running the same 60 seconds on a loop, not hysterically, precisely. The way I review a budget discrepancy, once for the shock, once for the facts. Convenient. Past her prime and knows it. That's why she's easy. The facts didn't get softer the second time through. They just got clearer. From down the hall, Derek called out, "Night, Camille." "I'll be in shortly," I said. My voice was steady. That surprised me, and then it didn't. I waited until I heard his breathing change, that slow, even rhythm that meant he was under. I knew that sound the way you know the sounds of a house you've lived in long enough, the settling of the pipes, the particular quiet after midnight. I knew exactly how long it took him to go from restless to gone. 12 minutes, usually. I gave him 15. Then I picked up my purse, walked through the kitchen, and slipped out the side door to the driveway. The night was cool and very still. I sat in the driver's seat without starting the car and looked at the house from the outside for a moment. The lit window upstairs, the curtain that moved slightly even though the window was closed. I used to love this house. That was a fact, too. I called my oldest friend, Phyllis Beaumont, a retired paralegal who had spent 30 years watching people sign documents they didn't understand and marry people they hadn't investigated. Phyllis answered on the second ring. "It's late," she said. "I know." She waited. That was the thing about Phyllis. She never pushed. She just opened the door and let you walk through at your own pace. I told her everything, start to finish, no editorializing, no crying. Just the words I'd heard through that thin wall and what I'd done with them afterward. I told her about the toast. I told her about the smile I'd held for 2.5 hours. She didn't interrupt once. When I finished, there was a short silence. Then Phyllis asked 2 questions. "Is your name on the deed to that house?" My hands went still on the steering wheel. "He said we'd do it after the wedding." Her voice gave nothing away. "And the joint account, do you have full access to the statements? Online, paper, all of it?" I thought I did. I thought I had the login, but sitting there in the dark, I realized I hadn't actually checked those statements in months. Derek managed the account. He was the financial planner. I'd trusted the architecture because I'd trusted the architect. "I'm going to find out," I said. "Before you do anything else," Phyllis said, "find out. Let me tell you something. There is a specific kind of hurt that lives in your chest like a stone. And then there is what happens when that stone gets cold. Cold is different. Cold is useful. What I felt sitting in that car wasn't grief anymore. It was the particular clarity that comes when you stop hoping you're wrong." I went back inside. I moved through the dark house without turning on any lights. I climbed into bed beside Derek, pulled the sheet up, and lay there on my back, looking at the ceiling, while he slept like a man who had never considered he might have anything to answer for. He thinks I'm too far gone to leave. Let him keep thinking that. I was still awake when the sky started to pale at the edges. The next morning, Derek was out of the house by 7:15. He had a breakfast meeting. He'd mentioned it the night before, though I couldn't have told you one word he'd said about it. I heard the front door close and lay there another full minute before I got up. I came downstairs in my robe, put the kettle on, and there it was, his laptop, open on the kitchen counter where he'd been reviewing something before he left, screen still lit. I wasn't looking for anything. I want to be clear about that. But the calendar was open, and right there in the middle of the week's view, clean as a line item in a spreadsheet, I saw it. A recurring Thursday lunch, 3 months of consecutive entries, every week blocked off at noon. One name. Just one name. Brianne. I took the photo without touching the keyboard. That was important to me, not touching it. I leaned in close enough to read the screen clearly, held up my phone, and captured the image. 3 months of Thursdays, noon every week. The name sitting there like it had every right to be there. Brianne. Then I straightened up, walked to the kettle, poured my tea, and left for work. You know what nobody tells you about the moment your life starts to crack? You still have to show up for all of it. Every meeting, every signature, every polite conversation in the hallway about nothing. I ran 3 departmental check-ins that day. I approved 2 staffing requests and sent back a budget revision with notes. I handled a vendor dispute that had been sitting on my desk for a week and resolved it in 20 minutes, because I simply didn't have the patience for anything that could be solved with information. My hands moved. My voice worked. The part of me that knew how to manage a hospital floor in a crisis managed this one the same way. Keep the surface steady while you figure out what's actually broken underneath. That evening, I sat down at my own laptop. Not his. Mine. I logged into the joint account. My hands went still. The balance was wrong. Not off by a little. Wrong by a number that had a comma in it. I sat forward and pulled up the transaction history going back 4 months. The transfers were there, neat and regular as rent payments. Different amounts, but consistent timing. Always within the first week of the month. Always to the same destination. An account I didn't recognize, listed under a business name that meant nothing to me. No company I'd ever heard of. Nothing that matched any expense we'd agreed on together. I read through it twice. Then I took screenshots. Every transaction, every date, every receiving account number visible on the screen. I emailed them to myself with a subject line that said only, "Documentation. Joint account." Then I pulled up my files. I had a copy of the lease from my old apartment, the one I'd given up 18 months ago when I moved into Derek's house, because that was the practical thing to do, because we were building something together, because the plan was to add my name to the deed before the wedding. The deed itself I'd never personally held. Derek had said he was handling it with the attorney who drew up his estate planning documents. I searched every folder I had, digital and paper both. My name did not appear on anything connected to that house. Not the deed, not the mortgage, not a single document that would tell a court or a bank or anyone with authority that I had ever lived there at all. 18 months of my life. My rent money rolled into his household account, my furniture in his rooms, and on paper, I was a guest. I sat with that for exactly 1 minute. Then I called Phyllis. I read her the account figures straight from my screenshots, the opening balance, what it should have been after my contributions, what it actually showed. I read her the business account name the money had been going to. I kept my voice level because the numbers didn't need any help making the point. Phyllis was quiet for a moment. "That money didn't disappear, Camille," she said. "It went somewhere specific. We need to find out where." "I know." "Good." A pause. "Don't move anything. Don't say anything. Just document." "Already started." She made a small sound, not quite approval, but close. The sound of someone watching you. Find your footing and deciding not to interfere. I didn't confront Derek at dinner. He came home talking about his promotion review, how his manager had mentioned him specifically in a partner track conversation, how the next 3 weeks were critical for visibility at the firm. I asked polite questions. I refilled his water glass. I thought about my mother's kitchen on Sunday mornings, the smell of eggs and the gospel station she kept at low volume while she moved around the stove. She used to say you could tell everything about a man by what he thought you didn't notice. I was 40 years behind on that lesson, but I was catching up fast. After Derek went upstairs, I opened a fresh notebook, the kind I use for budget planning, narrow-ruled, nothing special, and I started writing. Every deposit I had ever made into that joint account, every date, every amount. Transfer confirmations where I had them, bank statements where I didn't. I pulled up my personal account history and worked backward from the beginning, matching figures against memory, building the kind of record that doesn't leave room for argument. It took 2 hours. When I was done, I had 11 pages of documented contributions in my own handwriting, cross-referenced with account records I'd already sent to my own email. I capped the pen. I looked at what I'd built. Then I thought about that business account name, the one I didn't recognize, the one Phyllis had said went somewhere specific, and I started to wonder exactly what kind of somewhere we were going to find at the other end of it. Thursday came the way all difficult things come. Ordinary, unremarkable, no weather worth mentioning. I'd put in for a half day of personal time the week before, told my assistant I had an appointment. That was technically true. I parked across from the restaurant at 11:45 with a travel mug and a sandwich in a paper bag. The place was a midtown spot Derek had mentioned twice, once as a client lunch location, once in passing when he described a colleague's birthday gathering. He'd said it like someone mentioning a gas station. Useful, unremarkable, nothing I needed to file away. I'd filed it anyway. I always do. Let me tell you something. Patience is not a passive thing. Sitting in that car, watching a restaurant entrance, I was working. My mind was running inventory. What I knew, what I could prove, what I still needed. The sandwich was just something to do with my hands. At 12:03, Derek's car pulled into the lot across the street. I watched him walk to the entrance. He was in his good charcoal jacket, the one he wore for client meetings, the one he'd had cleaned last week. I remembered dropping it off at the dry cleaner. I remembered picking it up. At 12:05, a woman came around the corner. She was younger, I could see that clearly. She moved with the easy confidence of someone who hadn't yet learned to brace for things, and she smiled when she saw Derek, the kind of smile you can't perform, only feel. He turned when he heard her. He touched the small of her back as they went inside. That gesture. I knew that gesture down to the pressure of it. My jaw locked. I ate my sandwich. They were inside for 43 minutes. I know because I checked my phone when they walked out, then subtracted. They came out close together, unhurried, the way you walk when the conversation hasn't finished and you're not in any rush to let it. She said something and he laughed. Not the laugh he used in meetings. The other one. I took one photo, clear, well lit, both of them in frame. Then I put my phone in my bag, started the car, and drove back to work. You know what I didn't do? I didn't let myself sit in the feeling. Not yet. Because feelings were going to cost me focus, and focus was the only currency that mattered right now. I completed the rest of my afternoon. approved a staffing reassignment, responded to 17 emails, sat in a budget meeting for an hour and 20 minutes, and contributed 3 comments that were actually useful. Nobody in that building had any idea that the woman at the head of that table had spent her lunch hour watching her fiancé walk into a restaurant with someone who was not her. That evening, I went to the firm's public staff directory. It took less than 10 minutes to confirm what I already knew from the photo. Her name was Brienne, 29 years old, client relations manager. Not a junior analyst, the way Derek had described her the 2 or 3 times her name came up in conversation. Client Relations Manager was a different title entirely. It meant she worked with the same clients Derek managed. It meant they had reasons to meet that sounded completely reasonable on the surface. Her professional profile showed 3 months of listed activity, posts, connections, a quoted feature in an industry newsletter. The dates aligned exactly with 3 months of Thursday calendar entries. Exactly. I emailed her profile page, the directory listing, and the photo to myself. Clear subject line, documentation, Brienne. Then I called Phyllis. I told her what I'd seen. No extra words, just the facts in the order they happened. Phyllis was quiet through the whole thing, and when I finished, she said, "Now we know the what." Yes. We still need the money. She was right. The what was hurtful. The money was actionable, and the business account receiving those transfers, the name that meant nothing to me, was still the piece neither of us could read yet. "That account is the key," Phyllis said. "Once we know who owns it, you'll know everything." We agreed that was the next step. Identify the account. Understand where it led. After I hung up, I turned off the light in the kitchen and carried nothing upstairs but myself. I was in bed before Derek came home. I heard his key in the door, heard him move through the house, kitchen, bathroom, the particular creak of the 3rd step on the stairs. I kept my breathing slow and even. He came into the room, stood for a moment in the doorway the way he did when he thought I was sleeping, then changed clothes in the dark and got into bed. He didn't touch me. He was asleep in minutes. I lay there in the dark, listening to him breathe, and thinking about a business account registered under a name I didn't recognize, and all the reasons a man might open one without mentioning it to the woman he'd promised his future to. The following Tuesday, I stepped outside during my lunch break and sat on the bench near the hospital's east entrance, the one nobody used because it faced the loading dock. Private enough. I called my oldest friend Phyllis Beaumont, a retired paralegal who'd spent 30 years watching men bury things in paperwork and thinking nobody would look. Phyllis had been looking for 5 days. "I found it," she said. No preamble. That was Phyllis. I uncapped my water bottle and waited. The account receiving those transfers belongs to an LLC, registered about 5 months ago. Small, no website, no public business activity. Nothing that looks like it's ever actually done any business. She paused. "You want to know the registered agent?" I already knew. Something in my chest had already arranged itself around the answer before she said it. Brienne. My hands went still. "She's listed as the registered agent on the formation documents. Her name, her signature, filed with the state." Phyllis's voice was measured and careful. "A contact of mine runs background verifications. That's how I got to it. It's all public record if you know exactly where to look, and most people don't." I set my water bottle down on the bench beside me. 5 months ago. I thought about that number. Derek had proposed to me 11 months ago. Champagne and a restaurant and a speech about building something real. 5 months after that proposal, he opened a business account with the woman he'd been calling a junior analyst. I pulled out the small notebook I had been keeping since the night in the car. I wrote the LLC name, the registration date, Brienne's name next to the words registered agent, and the date Phyllis had found it. Then I drew a single line between the registration date and the date Derek proposed to me. 61 days apart. He proposed to me. Then, within the same 2 months, he registered a business account with another woman and began moving our wedding money into it. You know what that tells you about a man? It tells you he was never in this with both hands. He was always hedging, always calculating what each piece was worth and where it needed to go. I thought about the Atlanta promotion, the salary I didn't take, every deposit I'd made into that joint account, steady, dutiful, the way I did everything, while Derek directed pieces of it somewhere I wasn't meant to find. My mother used to hum while she ironed on Sunday evenings, pressing every crease perfect, even when we didn't have much that needed pressing. "You do the thing right," she used to say, "because doing it right is what you are." I'd been doing everything right. I'd just been doing it for the wrong man. I wrote the date one more time and underlined it. Camille. Phyllis's voice came back into focus. "How are you doing right now?" "I'm thorough," I said. A beat of silence, then, "Good. That's the right answer." We went through the next steps together. Phyllis explained what the documentation could support, the transfers, the LLC, Brienne's name on the account. She used words like unauthorized disbursement and small claims threshold. I wrote those down too. I wasn't ready to pull any triggers yet, but I needed to understand every option I had before I decided which one to use. I went back inside and worked the rest of my afternoon. 3 days later, over dinner, Derek pushed his plate slightly to the side the way he did when something was on his mind that he considered worth announcing. "My promotion review is in 3 weeks, he said. I looked up. "Senior partner?" "That's the one." He leaned back in his chair, comfortable, certain. "It's a real opportunity, Camille. Different compensation structure, different client profile. Puts me in a completely different category." He said the word category like it tasted good. "Leadership's been watching the last quarter closely. My numbers are where they need to be." "What does the review involve?" "Formal evaluation, a presentation, and a character endorsement from the oversight committee." He said it cleanly, the way he said most things, like the outcome was already settled and the conversation was just courtesy. "You know, Peterson mentioned the engagement at the Meridian dinner last month, said it demonstrated the kind of judgment the firm values at the senior level." He smiled at me. "So you see, you're already contributing to my career." That sentence. I let it sit right where he put it. "What happens if the review doesn't go well?" I asked. Derek laughed, the short, dismissive kind. "It won't." I nodded. I picked up both our plates and carried them to the sink. I stood at the counter with my back to him, the water running, and something clicked into place, quiet and exact, the way a deadbolt sounds when you turn the key all the way. He had used our engagement to build credibility with his firm. His promotion depended, in part, on how he looked, and how he looked depended on me standing beside him, steady and unsuspecting, exactly where he'd put me. I turned off the tap. I dried my hands. He had given me the room. He just didn't know I was planning to use it. The Saturday morning I drove to my Aunt Renee's house, I told Derek I needed to run errands. He was still in bed, half awake, phone already in hand. He said, without looking up. I stopped at the bakery on Clement Street and picked up 2 almond croissants and a small box of lemon tea cakes, Renee's favorite since before I was born. Then I drove the 20 minutes to her house in the quiet part of the neighborhood, where the trees were old and the yard still had flower beds people actually tended. Renee, my mother's older sister, 64 years old, the person in my family most likely to know a true thing and say it without any extras attached, met me at the door in her house slippers and reading glasses pushed up on her forehead. She looked at the pastry box. She looked at my face. She stepped aside and let me in without a word. We sat at her kitchen table while the kettle heated. I set the pastries out on the small ceramic plate she always used. She arranged her tea things, methodical, unhurried, the way she did everything. I didn't go straight to it. I asked her what she genuinely thought of Derek the first time they met. Renee was quiet for a long moment. She poured the water. She set the kettle down. She brought both cups to the table and sat across from me, and then she looked at me the way she used to look at me when I was 12, and she knew I already knew the answer to whatever I was asking. "I thought he was very good at making people feel seen," she said, "and I thought that was the thing to watch." My hands wrapped around the mug. "There's something I didn't tell you," she said. "When you announced the engagement, I almost did. I've been carrying it since. I didn't rush her. About 6 months before that man proposed to you, Renee said, he came to me, privately, said he cared about you and wanted to make sure he could provide the kind of future you deserved. She said it with no drama, just the plain shape of it. He asked me about the family finances, specifically whether there was anything left from your mother's estate that you might still be in line to receive. My jaw locked. He was smooth about it, she continued, framed it like concern, like a man who wanted to know what he was stepping into so he could take good care of you. She turned her mug slowly in both hands. But I've been around long enough to know the difference between a man asking about a woman and a man asking about a woman's money. I shut it down, told him the estate was settled and modest and not a topic I'd be discussing. She paused. And then I said nothing to you, because I didn't want to be the one who broke your heart on a feeling. She got up then and went to the small cabinet beside the refrigerator, the one with the good dishes and the envelopes of photos she'd never gotten around to digitizing. She came back with a photograph and set it on the table between us. My mother, younger than I ever really knew her, maybe mid-40s, standing in someone's summer garden, laughing at something just outside the frame. Her head was tipped back. The light was hitting her just right. She always said a man shows you who he is the moment you stop impressing him, Renee said quietly. Derek stopped being impressed before he ever really started. I looked at my mother's face for a long moment. I thought about every deposit I'd made into that joint account, every Saturday morning I'd spent on someone else's plan. She would have known in a week, I thought. Mama would have known in a week. I'm sorry I waited, Renee said. You told me now, I said. That was all I needed to say. I drove home with all of it assembled in my mind, clear, complete, and cold as standing water. Derek had proposed because he believed there was an inheritance worth attaching himself to. When he discovered there wasn't, he didn't leave. Leaving would have cost him. Instead, he kept me in place, stable, presentable, financially contributing, and too in love to look closely. And he opened a door to Brienne. Desire in one hand, security in the other, and Camille Davenport holding everything up from underneath. I wasn't the woman he chose. I was the structure he used while he chose someone else. Let me tell you something about what happens when a woman finally sees the whole picture. She doesn't fall apart. She gets very, very quiet. And then she gets to work. That evening, I found Derek in the living room with the television on and a low glass of bourbon on the end table. I sat down beside him. I told him I'd been thinking, that we'd never done a proper celebration with the people who actually mattered. His firm colleagues, a few family members, his closest friends. Something that showed everyone how serious we were about our future together. Derek looked at me. He smiled, warm, easy, already pleased with himself for having a woman who thought of these things. That's a wonderful idea, he said. I smiled back. I told him I'd handle everything. The 2 weeks before that dinner were the most productive 2 weeks of my life. I booked Derek's favorite restaurant, an upscale Southern fusion place downtown that he'd taken clients to twice and always mentioned like it said something about his taste. I requested the private dining room. I sent handwritten invitations on good cardstock, the kind you have to press a pen into. I confirmed attendance from Derek's 2 firm colleagues, including the one who oversaw his promotion review, a measured man named Gerald, who Derek had mentioned with barely concealed anxiety for 6 straight months. I confirmed Troy. I confirmed Phyllis. I confirmed Aunt Renee. I told Derek the guest list and watched his face arrange itself into exactly the expression I expected. Satisfied, flattered, a little proud. He said it was perfect. It was. 10 days before the dinner, I met Phyllis, my oldest friend, the retired paralegal who'd been holding my hand through every page of this, at a coffee shop midway between our neighborhoods. She arrived before me. There was already a folder on the table. We spread everything out between our coffee cups. The time-stamped screenshots of the joint account transfers, the LLC registration documents her contact had pulled, the professional profile confirming Brienne's title, her tenure at the firm, the registration date that landed inside the same 60-day window as Derek's proposal. It was all there, dated, clean. Documented the way I knew how to document things, because this was what I did. I managed systems. I tracked irregularities. I built cases before I ever called them cases. Phyllis had drafted the demand letter. She slid it across the table and let me read it in full. $6,800. That was the total of the unauthorized transfers. Money from a joint account we opened together for our wedding, moved without my knowledge into an LLC registered to the woman he was sleeping with, while I was refilling his water glass and smiling across the dinner table. $6,800. Plus 18 months of my life, but you can't put that in a demand letter. Small claims gives you a strong case, Phyllis said. You've got documentation, you've got the account agreement, and you've got transfer records that don't match any shared expense you can account for. But the letter alone, delivered correctly and at the right moment, might get you results faster. She tapped the folder. Men like Derek don't want court. They want the appearance of control. The minute a formal letter arrives, that appearance cracks. You know what I love about Phyllis? She never tells me what to feel. She tells me what I've got. I held the letter for a moment. I thought about timing, the dinner, the promotion review, the specific order in which information would do the most damage if it was released precisely rather than just released. Hold it, I said. Don't send it yet. Phyllis looked at me over her coffee cup. She didn't ask why. She'd known me long enough to know that when I asked her to wait, I wasn't hesitating. I was sequencing. One move left, I said. She nodded once and put the letter back in the folder. That same week, Derek mentioned the dinner to his colleagues at the firm. I know because he told me about it at dinner one evening, pleased with himself in that easy, unbothered way he had when things were going according to his image of himself. He said Gerald had commented that it was nice to see a man whose personal life was as solid as his professional reputation. Derek relayed this to me like he was sharing good news. I passed him the bread. My mother used to hum while she set the table on Sunday mornings, old gospel melodies, soft and unself-conscious, the sound of a woman entirely at home in her own life. I thought about that sometimes, in Derek's kitchen, how I'd been setting a table that was never mine. You really put this whole thing together, Derek said, gesturing vaguely at the dinner, at me, at all of it, like I was a feature of the room that was performing well. I did, I said. The night before the dinner, I turned off the bathroom light and got into bed. Derek was already there, scrolling his phone. He set it down after a few minutes. The room went quiet. Then he reached across the space between us and found my hand in the dark. He squeezed it. I'm a lucky man, he said. He meant it. That was the thing, he genuinely meant it. Just not in any way that had anything to do with me as a person. He meant he was lucky to have someone steady, someone who planned and organized and deposited money and smiled at dinner tables. He meant he was lucky to have a structure that held. I turned off the lamp. I said nothing, and in the dark, for the first time since the night I stood in his kitchen with a serving spoon in my hand and heard my life crack quietly in half, I smiled. Tomorrow, I had a dinner to host. The restaurant manager met me at the door. I'd called ahead that morning, not to change anything, just to confirm the room and ask one small favor. I wanted to be seated before the first guest arrived. He walked me to the private dining room himself, pulled out the chair at the head of the table, and I thanked him and sat down. I smoothed my dress, crossed my ankles, set my purse on the empty chair to my right. Let me tell you something. I'd spent 20 minutes that afternoon deciding what to wear. Not for Derek, not to impress his colleagues or signal anything to the room. I picked the dress because when I looked in the mirror, I looked like exactly who I was, a woman who knew precisely what she was walking into. Black, clean lines, my mother's small pearl earrings, the ones she wore to every occasion that required her to be taken seriously. I sat at the head of that table, and I was, for the first time in a long time, entirely comfortable in my own skin. Aunt Renee and Phyllis arrived together. I'd arranged that, asked them both to come early and come as a unit. Renee kissed my cheek and sat to my left without a word. Phyllis squeezed my hand once, firm and brief, and took the chair beside her. Neither of them asked if I was ready. They already knew. Derek's two firm colleagues came in next, the junior one first, then Gerald, the man who held Derek's promotion in his quiet, measured hands. Gerald shook my hand and said what a lovely idea this was. I thanked him and meant none of it. Troy arrived 5 minutes later. He scanned the room as he came in, clocked Renee and Phyllis, and something shifted in his expression. Just a flicker, there and gone. He was smart enough to feel that something was arranged, even if he couldn't name what. He sat where I'd put his card and ordered a drink immediately. Derek arrived last. Of course he did. He came through the door already performing, shoulders back, that easy smile moving around the room like a searchlight, shaking Gerald's hand with both of his, laughing at something before anyone had said anything funny. He kissed my cheek and told me I looked beautiful, and it cost him nothing, the way it always had. He took the seat I'd left him, not at the head because I was already there. He didn't notice. He was already talking. The first half of that dinner was the most interesting performance I'd ever watched. Derek was charming in the specific way that only reads as charm if you don't know what's underneath it. He told a story about a client win. He asked Gerald about his daughter's college choice and remembered the school correctly. He made Troy laugh twice. He was smooth and warm and entirely at ease, a man who had never once entertained the possibility that the room might not be his. The food came. The wine was poured. The conversation moved the way it moves at a table where everyone is comfortable, and nobody has said anything real yet. Then Derek lifted his glass. He thanked everyone for coming. He talked about the future. Their future. The word our doing a lot of work in every sentence. He looked at me when he said steady. He looked at me when he said generous. He called me the kind of woman who makes a man want to be better, and Gerald nodded approvingly, and Troy looked at his glass. He finished. The table waited for me to look moved. I stood up. No ceremony to it. I just rose from my chair, smoothed the front of my dress with one hand, and waited for the room to go quiet. It did. "I've been doing some financial planning of my own," I said. "Turns out I've discovered a few things Derek forgot to mention." I didn't look at him yet. I looked at the table. I named the joint account. I named the opening balance, the target balance, what it should have held. I named the transfer amounts, the specific figures, the dates, 4 months of them, and the business account they'd moved into. I named the LLC. I named the date it was registered, same 60-day window as our engagement. I looked at Gerald, then at his colleague. "I'd be very careful," I said, "about where his client's money goes." The room had stopped breathing. I turned to Troy. I said his name clearly, so there was no question I meant him. "You already knew what kind of man he is." I held his gaze just long enough. I was just the last one in the room to find out. Then I reached up and took off my engagement ring. I didn't press it into Derek's palm. I didn't throw it. I set it flat on the table in front of my plate, the way you set down a pen when you finish signing something and the business is concluded. I picked up my purse. I looked at Derek. Really looked at him. Maybe for the last time. And I said it. 5 words. "Don't call me. We're done." And I walked out. Behind me, the table was completely silent. The morning after, I woke up in Phyllis's guest room. I'd arranged it 2 weeks before. Same morning I booked the restaurant. I packed what mattered on a Tuesday while Derek was at work. Documents, my grandmother's quilt, the pearl earrings I'd worn the night before, clothes enough for a month. I left his house key on the kitchen counter and said nothing about it. By the time he walked into that restaurant looking like a man with a future, I was already gone from his house in every way that counted. My phone showed 17 missed calls from Derek, 2 texts from Troy. I set it face down on the nightstand and went back to sleep. The weeks that followed moved fast in some places and slow in others. The promotion news came first. 8 days after the dinner, Phyllis called me on my lunch break to tell me what her contact at a downtown networking group had already heard. Derek's senior partner review had been tabled. The colleagues present that night carried the story back to firm leadership the way these things always travel. Quietly, efficiently, and with enough detail to matter. The official language, I was told, was a judgment issue noted in the current review cycle. Professional. Bloodless. Permanent. Derek's arrogance cost him the one thing he'd been building toward for 3 years. And the beautiful part was that nobody had to lie to make it happen. I just told the truth to the right people in the right room. That's all. You know what they say about a man who thinks his reputation is solid? He's never tested it. Derek called 11 more times that week. I didn't answer once. Not because I was angry. I was past angry. I simply had nothing left to say to him that I hadn't already said in 5 words. Phyllis sent the demand letter on day 14. Certified mail, return receipt. She wrote it clean and exact. The account number, the transfer dates, every figure, the total. $6,800 in unauthorized withdrawals from a joint account I had co-funded, and he had quietly been draining. The letter named the LLC. It named Brianne as the registered agent. It cited the relevant small claims statutes. It gave him 30 days. He transferred the full amount in 19. No response, no explanation. Just a wire confirmation that hit my account on a Thursday afternoon while I was eating lunch at my desk. I looked at the number, set my fork down, and said a quiet thank you to the version of me that had screenshotted every single transaction instead of crying over them. 3 weeks after the dinner. I called Brianne once. I kept it short and I kept it kind. She hadn't done anything to me that Derek hadn't engineered. I told her what the LLC had been funded with. I told her the words Derek used about me that night in his kitchen, the ones Troy laughed at. I didn't editorialize. I didn't ask her for anything. I said what was true, and I let her decide what to do with it. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Thank you for telling me." 2 weeks later, Phyllis heard through the same network that Brianne had ended it. I won't pretend I felt nothing when I heard that, but what I felt wasn't satisfaction. It was closer to relief, the kind you feel when a door finally closes all the way and the draft stops coming through. Troy's text came on a Sunday evening. 4 words. I'm sorry I laughed. I read it once. I put the phone down. I didn't respond. Some apologies arrived too late to do the person anything. Troy wasn't sorry that night in Derek's living room when the laughing was easy and free. He was sorry now, because now there was a cost attached. I didn't need that kind of sorry. I was already somewhere else. 6 weeks after the dinner, on a bright Tuesday morning, I stood in the empty living room of a furnished, short-term apartment on the 3rd floor of a building I'd chosen myself, in a neighborhood I'd researched for 2 weeks, in a city I was still deciding about. The key was in my hand, my name on the lease, my signature at the bottom, my deposit paid from an account that had only ever had one name on it. Mine. I stood there in the quiet and I let it settle. I thought about the serving spoon, the weight of it in my hand that night, how I set it down so carefully, so deliberately, like I was already making the first move in a game he didn't know we were playing. I thought about my mother, the way she worked and loved and never wasted either. I thought about the woman who stood in that kitchen and decided to wait and to know and to choose her moment exactly right. She did all right, I thought. She did all right. 14 months later, Charlotte, North Carolina. I chose this city the way I should have chosen everything that came before it. By myself, for myself, with no one else's preference factored in. I researched the health system for 6 weeks before I reached out. I knew the budget structure, the administrative gaps, the tenure of the current leadership team. When they offered me the lateral transfer I'd passed over years earlier, I negotiated. I did it calmly, with documentation, the way Phyllis taught me to do everything that matters. I walked out of that final call with a senior director title and the largest salary of my career. I said yes on a Wednesday afternoon, sitting in my car in a parking garage, and I didn't tell a single person until I'd already signed. Let me tell you something. There is a specific kind of quiet that lives in a decision nobody talked you into. It's the best quiet I've ever known. My apartment is on the 4th floor. 3 windows in the living room, my name on the lease, the way it should always have been. Above my bed hangs a framed print I found at a weekend market 3 weeks after I moved in. Abstract, warm-toned, completely impractical as a decorating choice. I bought it because something in my chest shifted when I looked at it. That was reason enough. It was the first thing I ever purchased purely because it made me happy, and I'm not ashamed it took me this long to start doing that. Sunday mornings I wake up slow. My kitchen smells like my own coffee, strong the way I actually like it, not the medium roast Derek preferred that I'd been buying for 3 years without once asking myself why. I bought a good pan 8 months ago, heavy-bottomed, the kind that holds heat, and I use it every single weekend. Eggs, mostly, sometimes more, whatever I feel like. Nobody's schedule but mine. I still think about my mother in that kitchen sometimes. The smell of her Sunday mornings. Eggs and gospel music and the particular warmth of a house where someone loved you completely. She would have liked this apartment. She would have stood at these windows and nodded in that way she had, the nod that meant, yes, this is right. Phyllis drives up once a month. We find a restaurant or a bar or sometimes just her hotel lobby, and we order too much, and we talk too loud, and not once has anyone asked us to keep it down. Or if they have, we haven't heard them. She looks at me sometimes across the table with this small, satisfied expression, like a woman checking something off a list she started a long time ago. I love her for it. I love her for all of it. Aunt Renee calls every Sunday, regular as the gospel station. The conversations are shorter now than they used to be, 15, 20 minutes, easy and warm. We talk about small things, her garden, my new colleagues, what she made for dinner on Friday. You know what short, easy phone calls mean between 2 people who've been through something hard together? They mean everything is fine. They mean the crisis is over. They mean we're just living now, and living is enough to talk about. I went on 2 dates this past year, not because I felt ready. I'm not sure ready is a real thing, or maybe it's something you only recognize after the fact. I went because I could, because I wanted to see whether I still knew how to sit across from someone new and be curious instead of cautious. Neither one led anywhere. I wasn't disappointed. I was genuinely and completely fine with whatever came next. That's not a small thing. I spent years mistaking anxiety for love because the feeling of waiting and worrying and wondering felt like caring. What I had with Derek didn't feel safe. It felt urgent. I told myself urgency was passion. I know the difference now. This past Saturday, I closed out a storage unit I'd been paying on for 14 months, the last physical thread connecting me to the life I'd left. Most of the boxes had already been sorted, donated, thrown out in stages. What remained was small. 2 hours of work, maybe less. Near the bottom of the last box, wrapped in a double layer of dish towels, I found the serving spoon. I stood there in the concrete corridor of that storage facility and held it in both hands. I didn't think about Derek. I thought about the woman who set it down so carefully, so quietly, in a kitchen that was never going to be hers. How she straightened her dress, how she carried that food out and smiled across that table like her whole world wasn't cracking open underneath her feet. She knew something, that woman. She knew the moment hadn't arrived yet, so she waited. I put the spoon in the last box and drove it to my apartment. I put it in the kitchen drawer. I turned on the gospel station my mother played every Sunday morning, and I made my eggs in the good pan, and I ate alone at my own table, in my own home, in a city I chose, on a morning that belonged entirely to me. It was enough. Lord, it was finally more than enough. Thank you for watching until the end. If this story meant something to you, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. I've got 2 stories on the screen that you have to watch next. Have a great day!